Greetings, my brothers and sisters. You're in true to yours truly, Chrissy B here. It's been a very long time since I've done a video of any sort. I've been so tired and I've been so busy and so on. But I said to myself, I've got to do something today for the ones and ones to listen to. I've got holiday as well. Broken up from work last week, so I said yes. I'm at home doing some writing because I've got some books I want to write. I've been on the radio, even up to yesterday I was on the radio. I'll plug that now, consciousradio.com, the 3Ws.consciousradio.com. Every Monday morning is between the hours of 10 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I'll send the link down below if I can. So it's the 3Ws. So conscious is spelled with a C, not with an S. So it's CONCIOUS, consciousradio.com. Anyway, into the subject we want to talk about today. We wanted to talk about the essential musicians of Jamaica. I done a show yesterday, funny enough, on Conscious Radio about the early musicians from Jamaica. It's very important for me to do such a documentary, or for me to do such a video, because people like Bunny Striker Lee, the living legend, and others in the industry talk about the lack of appreciation shown towards especially those early musicians from Jamaica. I'm one of those people very, very fortunate to know a lot about the music. I've studied, I've read, I've travelled, I've spoken to the movers and shakers within the industry. I've spoken to many a lot of artists. I can't speak to them all because some of them are past, some of them you can't reach, but I've spoken to a few of them. Some of them are friends of mine, and I'm very, very privileged to be in that position. And so it's important for me to give a little synopsis, to give a little brief history, if I can, in summer, about the musicians, the early musicians of Jamaica. You know, Jamaica, as you know, as I said many times, I've gone through many changes. You know, the Jamaicans were playing and listening to mento in the 50s. But mento was really a form of music from Trinidad, which the Jamaicans adapted, but the Jamaicans never really became serious about music until in the late 50s, when the sound system thing was on the scene. Of course, sound system was on the scene from as far back as the late 40s. But when the Jamaicans started making their own music in the late 50s, it became viable for business. They were able to sell these products, sell these recordings via shops, and of course eventually UK reggae labels, at that time UK reggae labels like Trojan Island Records and so on, headed by Chris Blackwell with Ireland, and of course Lee Goffel, an Indian, I think it was an Indian Jamaican, set up Trojan Records. But Trojan and Ireland were like virtually brothers and sisters, because really out of Ireland came Trojan. They were operating from the same offices as well. The musicians in the early days really got the inspiration from the jazz numbers, from the jazz blowers, people like Count Basie and his All American Rhythm section. These music were played on the radio stations, and also they'll be imported. You have people like Coxon Dodd, Clement Coxon Dodd of Downbeat. He had a sound system called Sir Coxon's Downbeat. You also had Drew Creed for Trojan, who had a sound system by the name of Trojan. And incidentally, it was Trojan, Drew Creed for Trojan. Trojan Records, I just spoke about, got their inspiration from their title from. Of course, they were importing a lot of Jamaican music when the immigration took place, when the Windrush took place came out from the 40s. But a lot of Jamaicans or Caribbeans were coming over here from the Caribbean, and so what they did, they saw it upon themselves to really set up reggae labels, Jamaican music labels. At that time it was Ska and so on, and then Rocksteady, then reggae. And because it was a big marketplace for it, and of course a lot of Caribbeans are over there, they'll sell a lot, and which they did. They sell thousands upon into millions of copies. As I was saying before, the Jamaican musicians were adapting what they were hearing on the sound system, and even before that, because lots of people in the jazz world came to Jamaica. People like Nat King Cole came to Jamaica. I believe Count Basie also came to Jamaica as well and performed with his band. And the Jamaicans got a dosage of what it was like in those days, what jazz was like in those days. Also, you had a lot of Jamaicans who were really touring, people like Baron and the Dragonaires, he formed his band all the way back in 1956. You had people like Cluett Johnson. In actual fact, Cluett Johnson and his Blues Blasters was one of the most prominent bands in Jamaica around that time. We're talking in the 1950s, the very, very late 1950s, going into the 1960s. In actual fact, the band was formed by the great guitarist Ernie Ranglin. Ernie Ranglin formed that band. And the bass player in the band, Cluett Johnson, they abbreviated as Clue J, but his real name was Cluett Johnson. Ernie Ranglin gave Cluett Johnson the license to actually lead the band, because Ernie Ranglin was getting a lot of work uptown to perform at hotels and to perform in various Caribbean islands and even overseas. So it was hard for Ernie Ranglin to juggle the band, as well as leading the band, as well as performing and recording and touring. So it gave Cluett Johnson the honour of taking over the band. And even though sometimes Ernie Ranglin came back into the band and performed bits and pieces, and occasionally was there in the background with his guitar, but really he wasn't there as full time as he was before, because he became an in-demand guitarist. And actually, it was actually him who really was behind. He actually helped Chris Blackwell produce My Boy Lollipop for Millie Smalls in 1964. You see. And then, the Clue J and the Blues Blasters, they backed a lot of the early musicians on the island, people like Owen Gray, people like Laurel Aitken, even Prince Buster used them as well in the early days, people like Monty Morris, all of those first wave, Derek Morgan, first wave of Jamaican musicians they were backed by it. You also had another group by the name of Ursan Sang and his City Slickers. Ursan Sang was a pianist, and he also worked for the likes of Coxsone Dodd. When Coxsone Dodd just started up, well, even just before Coxsone Dodd started up Studio One, he set up Studio One in 1962. But before he would set up Studio One in 1962, what happened was he was making records for his sound system, so Coxsone's Downbeat. Now when he set up his Studio One in 1962, then Ursan Sang was amongst the first early backers of his records. Also, the Clue J and the Blues Blasters was also working at Studio One in the early days, backing a lot of Coxsone Dodd's material. This is before the Scatolites came on the scene. But the nucleus of some of Ursan Sang and his City Slickers instrumentalists, as well as the Clue J and his Blues Blasters instrumentalists, will also go into form the Scatolites, because you had Roland Alfonso, the great tenor sax man, who was also part of Clue J and his Blues Blasters there. He actually did, because what happened was they came away from Clue J's band and went on to form the Scatolites. You had people like Tommy McCook, who was a Cuban really. He also played in various bands as well around that time. A lot of these people also, a lot of the early musicians also came from Alpha Boys, which is a school set up by Roman Catholic nuns in the 1800s for disruptive boys who were misbehaving at home. And people like Don Drummond, the great trombonist, who was a really cool member of the Scatolites, performing with that band. You also have people like Tommy McCook, who was also a great saxophonist, was there with the Scatolites. So the Scatolites really came out of those early bands. You had the Dewdroppers. Not much is spoken about the Dewdroppers. They're also a backing band in the early days. I believe the Dewdroppers also had occasionally Roland Alfonso in the band. I believe he was also there at times as well around that time, as well as quite possibly Tommy McCook as well. You know? But not much is spoken about that band, but they were a really, really cracking band in the R&B days in Jamaica in the very early days. And then so what happened was that you're talking like 1958 going into 1961, so it's about a 3-year period. For Jamaicans at this time were adapting R&B they were hearing from America. As I said before, you had people like Coxsone Dodd, you had people like Duke Reid who went to America on farm work. The Jamaican government issued them to go out there to work on the sugar cane fields, as well as working on various farms, picking fruits and veg and so on and so forth. And so they also use this as a great opportunity to go and pick up the latest records. So while they're out there in America, it's mainly in Florida and New York they went to. And so while these guys, the Jamaican sound system operators, because the Jamaican sound system was in full swing at that time. Coxsone Dodd had his downbeat sound. Duke had the Trojan, had his Trojan sound system at the time. Prince Buster had the voice of the people. But with Prince Buster, because he was a boxer, he had to pass a fitness test to go out to America. And because Prince Buster at that time was a boxer, at times he failed a fitness test because of his hands. He took a lot of pounding, it took a lot of battering, and he also gave a lot of battering. So obviously as a boxer, you're going to receive blows, you're going to be given blows. So as a result, sometimes Prince Buster failed a fitness test to go out there, so he was left behind sometimes. Yeah, the biggest guy out there at the time, Tom the Great Sebastian, the biggest sound system operator at this time. He was of Chinese extraction. He killed himself, I believe, somewhere in the early 60s. Nobody knows why he killed himself, but he was the best sound system operator at that time. But Drew Creed the Trojan, who went eventually going to set up Treasure Eye Records in 1965, what he did, he toppled Tom the Great Sebastian for 3 years straight. Then was eventually, crowned the king of sounds and blues for 3 years straight between the years of 1954 and 1956, you see. And there you go. But the early musicians were cracking, You had the ska period, the R&B. The Jamaicans wanted to come out of R&B now. This was in 1961. And then what happened was Prince Buster went away, and then he came back. He went away overseas, and he came back. And then when he came back, he put Eric Monty Morris on a song called Humpty Dumpty. This was late 1961. And they reckon that's the very first ska record. At that time, the Jamaicans they were still playing R&B. They were trying to come out of R&B, but they're trying to experiment with the sound. They wanted a new sound. They wanted something which was really generic to Jamaica and authentic, their own identical, their own, identifiable sound. A sound which is synonymous of Jamaica itself, but they couldn't get what it was. They couldn't get it. They tried and tried, and then they got this beat called a ska. You see, they got a beat which, one of the first examples of ska, even before Eric Monty Morris's Humpty Dumpty, was Feel Spectre's Easy Slapping, which was recorded in 1959. Some reports have it down it was recorded in 1956 because he did it in a sound system. He did it for Coxsone Dodd 56, but it wasn't released. They redid it again in 1959, and then that was the first commercial session that they had in Jamaica, because before that they were just issuing sides for sound system operators to clash off with one another, and so on, like Drew Creed and Coxsone and Tom the Great Sebastian and Nick the Champion and so on and so forth. But when Easy Slapping came on the scene, it changed a lot of things, and it became a viable business for these producers. And then Coxsone took advantage of this. In the same session, you had Alton Enniny's Muriel, which was also done in that same session as well. We had Higgs and Wilson Manio, I believe, was done around the same time, but it wasn't done for Coxsone Dodd. It was done for the would-be Prime Minister of Jamaica, Edward Seaga. At that time, Edward Seaga was really heading World Records, WIRL, World Records. He was the main man there, the head of that organisation, and even after he left, they were still going on, because they were going to produce acts like the Ethiopians and other such acts down in the 60s. One of the most important musicians at this time was a man called Judge Jerry, who was a great guitarist, and Judge Jerry played a lot of Prince Buster recordings. He starts off, he's got a very signature sound of his guitar. That rhythm and blues type of thing going on as an intro to songs. A very, very great guitarist. He played in a lot of songs, thousands of songs in the pre-ska period and in the ska period as well. So Judge Jerry Hines, he died some years ago, but we can't forget him. As I mentioned, Roland Alfonso, the great tenor sax man, a well-trained man as well, also part of the Scatolites. Tommy McCook, another sax man, who go on to form the Supersonics in 1965 after Don Drummond's demise, because Don Drummond passed away in 1969. Thereabouts, 69. He went into Bellevue, which is a mental institution in Jamaica, and he went there after he killed his Commodore wife, Margarita Ford, in 1965. I think it was New Year's, and then they took him to Bellevue, and he died there not long after. And then that was the demise of the Scatolites, because Don Drummond, and even though the main leader of the Scatolites, some say it was Tommy McCook, some even say it was Roland Alfonso, Don Drummond was the most charismatic man at the time on it, because he played so much great solos with his trombone, and he gave the Scatolites such a signature sound with his trombone, that deep bass heavy trombone notes that only he can conjure up and only he can come up with. So when that was missing, that was a big component coming out of the Scatolites. So they demised. In actual fact, they demised, but it was a blessing, because what happened was two groups had come out of that group. So the Satellites, after the group, as I mentioned it before, Tommy McCook was in the group, Warren Alfonso was in the group, Don Drummond, who'd gone to Bellevue, was in the group, but you had other people that like Lloydie Brevitt on bass, Lloyd Knibb on drums, Jackie Mitu on keyboard and organ, and other members as well, Johnny Moore on trumpet. There were so many other. Lester Sterling, someone's played alto sax as well, someone's played trumpet on it as well. And Lester Sterling, so those guys, the likes of Lester Sterling, they went on to form the Soul Brothers, which carried on at Studio One, because for the most part the Satellites were at Studio One, but they also, recorded for other producers like, of course, Prince Buster, Drew Creed, Top Deck Records, and King Edwards, and so on. And so more or less, they stayed at Coxon, but Tommy McCook took away. He went away to form the Supersonics at Drew Creed's Treasure Isle studio. At that time, Treasure Isle was just opening up, so this was '65, thereabouts, when Drew Creed started Treasure Isle Records. Before that, he was producing records, but not at Treasure Isle. You see, he was doing it at various other studios like Federal, which was one of the very first studios in Jamaica, and JBC as well, which is owned by the Jamaican government. A lot of the early producers were recording their materials at those two studios as well. And so, and then ska came on the scene. Dennis Ska Campbell played a lot with the Satellites as a guitarist, and they said that he was the very first person to actually come up with the ska guitar. He was the first man to play ska guitar. I'm not sure. According to Bunny Lee, they said that the first person to usher the word ska was quite possibly Dennis Ska Campbell, but I've also heard stories that it was also Tommy McCook. They said that Tommy McCook came up with the title because he went to watch a movie one day at the cinema with Ska V in the title, and he came back and he said he wanted the group to have that name, because after hearing what somebody done in the studio, possibly quite possibly Dennis Ska Campbell said, let the guitar go ska ska ska, and so Tommy McCook said, you know what, I think this is ska. Let the title, let our group have the name of ska in its title. Accordingly, Coxon Dodd said it was actually him who had the final say, and what to call the group. And he said to McCook that, why not call yourself the Satellites? And then everybody agreed upon it. Words to that effect. I've heard many stories, but that's one of the most prominent and dominant stories I've heard. That call yourself Satellites. And so the name stuck, and that was from '62 onwards. They existed from late '62 up until '65. Some reports said that they were only on the scene for 1.5 years. They were on the scene for at least 3 years. At least 3 years, from '62 to '65, when they demise. Of course, after Don Drummond demise, and then the Soul Brothers came from that, and then the Supersonics with Tommy McCook came from that. Then after an evolution of the Soul Brothers, then you had the Soul Vendors at Studio One. Tommy McCook was still carrying on at Treasure Isle with the Supersonics, and then eventually I believe the Supersonics evolved into something like the Bunny Lee All Stars and the Prince Buster All Stars. You had the nucleus of some of the guys from those two groups forming those other bands in the early '70s. You had the Now Generation, which also backed a lot of Joe Gibbs numbers in the 1970s. People like Fully Forward and those guys were part of that group as well. Val Douglas, and so on. He also had people working at Randy's studio, because Randy's had a studio there, and the Satellites also recorded for them. I should have said it before. They also recorded for Randy's as well. Don Drummond recorded solos for Randy's, and then Rico Rodriguez, a great trombone, who they called Don Drummond Mark II, because he was also great at trombone. But he came over to England in 1962. Sometimes he'll come back to Jamaica, because he worked predominantly for Prince Buster, and he'll go back and forth, and he'll come back and still record for Prince Buster. He also recorded for Studio One as well. He also played alongside the Satellites in the early days, or the groups before the Satellites, like Clue J, and also groups like Ursan Sang and the City Slickers. Rico Rodriguez was around that nucleus of musicians. He came at Alpha as well. He was, because Alpha, my father used to always tell me about Alpha. Alpha brought out some of the very best musicians. Without Alpha, for Jamaican music as we know it today would not be the same. It wouldn't even be half the same. So we're going to give credit to people like Sister Ignatius, who was the head of Alpha until she died in 2003. Yeah, many other people like Eric Deans, who had an orchestra which featured a very young Don Drummond, worked there as well at Alpha, was a teacher there, and as I said, he had a group there, and Don Drummond was young at the time. He had a young Don Drummond in his group. You know, we can't forget people like Sonny Bradshaw. He had an orchestra. He was very, very good at promoting the music, promoting the sound systems as well. The great Sonny Bradshaw. You know, I believe he's passed away now. You know, people like Ver Jones, who was a great talent spotter, and he used to put on a lot of variety shows, a lot of talent shows as well, with people like Derek Morgan that featured people like Derek Harriott come through, and all of the early musicians from Jamaica come through the Ver Jones Opportunity Hour, because it was an opportunity hour he had, and he gave people, budding singers, would-be singers, their platform to actually go on stage and sing, you know, and strut their stuff. And perhaps if it wasn't for these guys, we wouldn't even have any music. It'd be like an null and void situation. So we've got to give thanks to these guys to have the imagination to set up these things. As I said to you, ska, we had ska. According to David Morgan, ska came in 62. As I said, Prince Buster had Eric Monty Morris there with Humpty Dumpty, which changed the emphasis, you know, the R&B, the Chana chana nana chana na chana nana chana na chana nana, that type of rhythm blues beat there. Yeah, you know, the drum blues. You hear people like Smiley Lewis, people like Louis Jordan, Nat King Cole, Professor Longhair, Fats Domino, Little Richard, all of these people on that rhythm. That, you know, rhythm and blues, R&B, early 50s. You're talking about 50s, Roscoe Gordon, 50s, up to the 60s. And for Jamaicans, we're a bit behind because they're young to the music. They're hearing it through radio stations like Winds and so on, which came through the transmissions. Winds was a station based in America, but because Jamaica and America were very close, they could pick up the transmission and they could hear what was going on. So they could hear the great singers of the day from America and hear how they sung. And a lot of the early Jamaican musicians would go to the radio and gauge how to sing like Nat King Cole, how to sing like people like Ray Charles, people had to sing like Fats Domino, who came to the island actually, Fats Domino in 61, because Drew Creed and him were very good friends, and he came and he toured there, and he stayed with Drew Creed a lot. Anyway, and people like how they sung, and Owen Gray tried to imitate Little Richard at the start of his career. If you listen to a lot of Owen Gray's early numbers, you can hear like a Jamaican version of Little Richard. Just their voices are so identical, it's not even funny. And that's how they got the inspiration from, the Rins and listen. And there's a story, the great Stranger Cole said that one night he had to set up to listen to how a particular artist, you know, sung, and he said he had to keep going to the bathroom to wash his face for him to stay awake because he kept falling asleep, and he wanted to listen to how some of the singers were singing so he could practice and get his voice similar to theirs. So he had to keep getting up to go to the bathroom, wash his face, come back and listen to the radio. It's things like that why, you know, we have to talk about these artists and have to talk about the early musicians, because they lay the template. So what we're hearing now today in the bashment world and even in the R&B world comes from that generation of artists, both in Jamaica and both in America, you see. And so we had ska. We had ska for 4 years. Ska was, as I was saying before, Derek Morgan said that ska was a mistake because they're trying to play on the afterbeat. Ska was like tumba 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 ska 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 ska. It more or less echoes when you go along with the rhythm. It more or less echoes the word ska. You know, they were saying that because it's an up-tempo beat. Some people call it the walking pace of ska. Some people call it the running pace. It's more of running pace because it's really fast. You got some slow ska, and say 62. Say in 62 and 63 the ska was a lot slower, yeah, but when it developed it became a lot quicker, yeah. I think from late 63, 64, 65 it became a lot quicker. Then you had those little peps which Bubba Brooks, the great trumpeter, introduced into some of his songs when he was playing with the Scatterlights. You know, he also had a band as well in the early days, but he played a lot with the Scatterlights as a trumpeter, you know, and also with Tommy McCook and his Supersonics as well as a trumpeter. And he introduced a lot of peps, and that's where it really came from. And people like King Stitt, yeah, introduced it to a lot of their repertoires when they became DJs, and Uroy and so on, Solid Comic, yeah, Count Machuki. They were sound system operate. They worked for. They were sound system selectors. Coxon had both King's Tit and Count Machuki working on his sound system in the 50s and the 60s. As I said, he had 5 around Kingston at one stage. Yeah, Coxon had 5 sound system. Coxon Derby had 5 sound systems around Kingston, Jamaica at one stage. And you had people like Count Machuki, the 2 pioneering DJs in King's Tit, doing, selecting records and doing their peps. And I want to talk about that one day, how that came along. I want to talk about the DJ phase of the music. I'll do that maybe next week. We'll do the DJ take on things. We're going to also talk about rocksteady, talk about reggae. We're going to do this in sections, but at the moment we're doing about some of the early musicians of Jamaica. We're going to come and do a part 2. This is part 1 because we can't talk about it in the short space of time that we have. And so we're up to the ska period now. Next week we're going to come and talk about rocksteady. This week we spoke about R&B and ska, some of the musicians. Next week we'll talk some more about the musicians. Then we're going to we'll talk about people like Jackie Jackson, the bass player of the reggae period. We're going to talk about Vincent Grennan, the great drummer, and New Malcolm, the great drummers of the rocksteady period, because they introduced the 1 drop into the 3rd beat of the bar 4 to slow the music down from ska into rocksteady. So we're going to talk about these guys next week. So once again, we thank you so much. As you know, ska's gone around to the world. Prince Buster promoted it. My Boy Lollipop, Millie Smalls, and so on. And so we thank you so much. We're going to talk some more. We're going to carry on next week. We're going to talk some more about it, and we're going to try and go as far as we can. We're going to go all the way up into the 80s if we can. So we're taking it piece by piece, step by step, and we're going to go over some more things as well as time goes on. So once again, we thank you so much for listening to us. Peace out.